Hi. Wow, I haven't even started yet. It's so nice, I've got to say. I'm teaching 2 courses online, and if I seem a little high on the energy right now, it's just because it is so thrilling for me to actually be in a room with human beings who are not furry and running around on the floor. That would be my cat. Anyway, I have a lot of things that I thought about talking about today, mostly because I am finishing up a dissertation. I feel like I should give you guys, like, you know, I used to do this in my classes where I would give students green index cards, and they were jargon alerts. So whenever I started to descend into jargon, the green index cards were to be raised, and I would get an immediate visual feedback of I am veering dangerously into uncharted waters. So I am going to try to limit myself in terms of references to 19th century educational practices. I can't promise how far we will go with that. If I talk about 19th century educational technology, it is because I feel that we are in very much some similar situations with regards to the establishment of new educational formats. One of the things that I had the privilege to do for about 8 or 9 years was work with an awful lot of faculty in lots and lots of different disciplines across the university in developing online and hybrid courses. And a lot of different things are going on. As many of you, I know, because I'm looking out at the audience at other people who work with faculty doing this work, a lot of different things are going on. There's a lot of experimentation. In the language of my dissertation, I would say there is a lot of interpretive flexibility at this particular moment in terms of what counts as I'm teaching you now, or you are learning from me now, or this counts as providing you with assessment opportunities, or what have you. And when we have these moments of interpretive flexibility, there are opportunities to get to define or to try to shape the course of where we are headed. One of the things about interpretive flexibility, though, is that in many cases it closes off. Okay? So at some point in the 19th century, the interpretive flexibility of the classroom shut down. Okay? So now, if we were to walk into an environment, and this is not a particularly great room for me to do this example with, but usually when I'm talking in a classroom, I can say to the people in the room, you recognize this as a classroom because the desks are in a particular position. You know that you are supposed to sit there. I am supposed to stand here. I am the one who gets to do most of the talking. You are the ones who get to do most of the listening. And there's a whole bunch of practices which are socially normed into us since we were yay-high to an infant, okay? That wasn't always the case, okay? That was a construction. It is interesting to see in the 19th century how the creation of the classroom was identified and marketed and promoted as a technology itself. So if we're talking about teaching with technology, for anyone who has been standing in a classroom delivering lectures, well, by a 19th century definition, you were teaching with technology, even if every last bit of thing that you presented was with paper and pencil and ink. So far, so good? Okay. So interpretive flexibility suggests that at some point, you are going to walk into a situation and you will immediately be able to identify this as this is an online learning course. It looks like this. It has these features. It doesn't do this. It does that. We're not there yet. Okay? We are still at a moment where things could potentially be shaped and go in different directions. And that's why I think it's important to think a little bit about the history of where these practices came from and to look at that process a little tiny bit. Because I can't say that I feel like I have a lot of specific things that I can suggest. Like, you, sir, should refuse to teach unless you get X, Y, and Z in your contract. Or you shouldn't develop a course unless you can say for certain it will accomplish A, B, or C. I don't know that I have those kinds of concrete things. What I can see, though, from looking at historical patterns, suggests to me that this may be a moment where small efforts could shape things for the future. So far, so good? We're still good? Okay. Now, So this is my title slide. I don't speak with PowerPoint much. So if you want to giggle at my attempts to work with the PowerPoint, feel free. We're not going to get into everything regarding teaching. I love to talk about teaching. My family will tell you that I can bore the ears and the pants off of them for hours at family dinners talking about every last little detail. We're not going to, I'm going to try really, really hard. Actually, I should probably have a different color index card with you're boring me about enough about the teachers. We're also not going to get into everything regarding teaching with technology or online or hybrid educational practices. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is more basic. Okay, but I think it should definitely suggest scenarios for ways to move forward with online and hybrid courses. I should also mention that I spent many years talking with faculty about it, and for some reason I cannot shut myself up. So if you approach me or send me email at the wonderful little email addresses that you have there, I will probably talk your ear off and answer anything that you want to know. I brainstorm, I act as a sounding board. Chris Aziz is smiling at me because I was doing this with him just before we got started. So please feel free. I'm finishing a doctorate focused on the interactions between technology and education, the development of school systems. My argument basically is that we got publicly funded education in the Mid-Atlantic region because they positioned classrooms as technologies. Teaching was problematic. Teachers were typically people who were drunks, who were unable to hold down any kind of long-term position. It was given as charity to people who they felt could not survive under any other circumstances. Politically, it was a problem to pay these people taxpayer money to educate children. Okay? So by positioning these new classrooms as being different, as being technologically snazzy, they are described as educational engines of great operational power. The teacher was the engineer, okay? The operator of the machine and part and parcel of the machine as well. And this was how they made the case for why your tax dollars should go to pay for the education of other people's children. This is the political rationale, okay? If any of this strikes you as somewhat reminiscent of some of the conversations that we've been having in the public education reform debate, this is not accidental. Okay? There is a wonderful book recently published by William Rees called The Testing Wars, which examines in great detail how the assessment practices and standardized testing come from this era and come from these political conversations. So yes, this is where we are at. Okay? We struck a bargain. Okay? We said, we can do the work of education. You will provide money for us to do the work of education. We will provide these outcomes, and you can check us on these outcomes using these methods. Okay? Technology, just as it provided an answer to some of the problems for people who wanted publicly funded education in the early 19th century but couldn't figure out how to get it, solved that problem then. You've probably been hearing talk about governors who are suggesting $10,000 bachelor degrees. Online, MOOC-based Masters of Computer Science programs being offered at the University of Georgia. Okay. Most of these come with massive reorderings of who does what in the teaching and instruction and the curriculum development of these programs. So once again, technology is acting as a solvent. Okay. We constructed a set of practices that were associated with the act of teaching based on one set of economic, social, and technological setups. The technology is changing, certainly the social and the economic impetuses have changed, so we can expect that we're going to see more of this experimentation. Now, I can see that maybe it's probably the time to get to the why should you care? How many of you have been curious about the question of the relationship of education and upward mobility for American society? Okay, we like to portray ourselves as people who work in higher education, that we do work which is socially valuable. Okay, we provide people with the tools that are necessary to lead full lives. Okay. part of what we are supposed to be providing, and this is the more explicit part of what we're supposed to be providing from the perspective of the people who give us money, is the ability for students to find work that will provide them with the economic wherewithal to be able to enjoy the fuller, richer life that we are hopefully giving them. So far, so good? Okay. One of the things that was sort of fun about that. One of the things that's sort of fun about my new life working in my living room is that I can take the time to watch wonderful, long, scholarly communications about different fields, different portions of the field of education. There was a great one last week from the Thomas Fordham Institute talking about the role of education in upward mobility. The question of college for all, okay, is sort of the rubric that this tends to get lumped under. And the interesting thing is basically what they're saying is it's not so much college for all as some form of post-secondary education for all. So one of the things that they are anticipating, and a lot of this is technologically mediated and driven, is that there will be additional educational opportunities which will provide alternatives. Okay. Many of you may be familiar with Anya Comments. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. The DIY education person. She's currently, she's actually doing something really nifty with the NPR education reporters. They're posting the 50 world famous educators. They're like doing a profile every couple of weeks. They did Socrates. And for a girl like me, like getting to see Socrates show up in your newsfeed is like a really good day. Anyway, but so she has basically authored a couple of books which basically suggests to students, don't go into debt. Okay, you may be able to do better for yourself educationally and professionally and financially if instead of paying money to a university, go and take the free online course materials, go and find yourself an apprenticeship, go and find yourself other means to the end that we have been promising as universities, as colleges. Still with me? Okay. So one of the things that technology is going to provide are alternatives. Okay. So we will not be the only game in town. We will certainly not be the cheapest game in town. Okay. So one of the things that we ought to be clear about is what choosing to do your education at an institution like Rutgers will be providing you. Okay? And I believe, and those of you who have heard me yammer about curriculum design know this in spades, I firmly believe that curriculum design is one of the ways that we can improve students' educational experiences while at college. Okay? This is a task which has been sort of bolted onto the role of faculty. Okay? Some faculty, and I class myself, in fact, I'm looking at Emily. You know this as full well. I was as late as anybody in terms of pulling together the materials for my online course. So this is totally the pot calling the kettle black here. Sometimes we are in situations where we can embrace that responsibility, and sometimes it happens by accident. I would like to think in the case of the mouse course, I'm somewhere between those two poles. But in many cases, it is not happening through design. It's not happening intentionally. And if good curriculum development happens, all too frequently, it is not through some kind of systematic function, but rather through the happy accident of two minds, happening to get together at something like this and chatting about the possibilities of doing a hybrid course or so forth. Still good? Okay. So yeah, that's why I feel so strongly about talking about this. I'm also, not that I'm just a scholar. In fact, I kind of feel like a fraud positioning myself as a scholar. I'm also a 20-year veteran. I've taught at Rutgers for 16 years. Okay. A lot of that time was spent as a non-tenured track faculty member, oddly without a department. So I had the joyful experience of getting the opportunity to focus solely on teaching. I had no research, no service responsibilities, although occasionally I went out of my way to put myself in line with some service responsibilities. But I just got to teach. Okay? That was what I loved to do. All right? So I think about teaching I'm trying to think about teaching, I should say, as a scholar, but I also feel very strongly about it because it's what I've chosen to do with my life. All right. So yeah, I don't mean to like put myself like a halo or something like that, but this is something. Okay, different choices, important part of the context, but again, I want you to keep the thought of the students in the background because they are definitely an important part of this context, but for most of the talk I want to focus on teaching. So as faculty, we are confronted with more choices. Our students are going to have more choices through technology in terms of how they go about getting their education. We as instructors, okay, are going to be challenged with making more and more and more choices in terms of how we are going to provide that education for our students. Okay. How many of us feel very well equipped to deal with this panoply of choices? Yeah, there you go. I'm hoping that the hands weren't staying down just because of laziness. Yeah, it's daunting. Okay. I've been working in ed tech for 20 years. I get tired of there's another app, there's another app, there's another app. I dutifully scribbled down during Beth's talk, and I fully intend to try some of those. But I know that best intentions are not always going to get my courses where they need to go. Okay? So yeah, there's a lot that we're going to be presented with. Oddly, we are making these choices, and we're making them with technologies that promise us more options, but in many cases actually provide us with constraints. Okay? If you teach online and you've had to do some form of assessment, you know what I'm talking about. Okay? Yes, we can obviously solve a lot of problems in terms of improving access to educational materials by putting them online. The assessment, which, as I mentioned before, is part of that bargain that we struck, okay? The assessment portion of it, it's not so clear. Okay? It's not always so clear. I think, and I can talk at very long detail about how I think we could fix this or try to move towards fixing this. But one of the things that we're obviously faced with is that the technology, while it does provide us with additional possibilities, also in some cases comes with some not so great backlash. So some of the time we're happy, some of the time we're not. Sometimes we think that the students are better off for the work that we do in terms of bringing technology into our teaching, and sometimes we're not. How many of us have tried implementing a technology in one of our classes only to have it go spectacularly south? Oh yeah, okay. How many of you have thought about using a new technology in one of your classes but decided not to because you had the specter of having witnessed something go spectacularly south? Yes, okay, yeah. One of the things that I used to make my undergraduate students in the IT and learning class do is I actually asked them to stand up and teach for 15 minutes. They had to develop a curriculum, deliver it through a non-technologically mediated set of activities to a classroom of students they didn't know, so they had no friends in the audience to help them out. And the students went from saying, this is going to be the easiest assignment I have ever done in my life, to, oh my God, that was the hardest 15 minutes I ever had to spend. Because what they didn't get was that when you're in the act of teaching, it's not the same as doing a presentation. You're actually juggling a lot of different activities in your head while you're working. Oh, by the way, I also had the students in the random guinea pig class fill out the same set of evaluations. They were not used in the grading of my students, but I let them see what the students in the classroom had thought of their teaching. And that was an eye-opener for everybody. I got much better teaching evaluations from that class. Just a hint. So yeah, it is difficult to say when we are doing things that are, in fact, I would say that I have never, after all the things I've done to try to put technology and education together, I can say with great certainty that I am not certain at all when I am necessary. I can sometimes smell it when I'm on the right track, you know, but I have been wrong sometimes. So, you know, if you want me to give you a gilt-edged guarantee that this is going to work, yeah. Like Gail said, I've been here for 20 years. I'm older, and I'm not wiser, but I've, you know, learned not to take that bet. Okay. So this is where we come to the part of the presentation where I'm just going to be pulling a couple of things together, you know, for thoughts. There are things that we're starting to feel like we might know. Okay, this particular book Visible learning, a synthesis of over 800 meta-analysis related to achievement, is a work done by, I believe he's actually New Zealand, educational researcher. And what he did was he looked at these meta-analysis of what actually seems to make a difference in terms of teaching and learning outcomes. Teaching through technology, not one of the big winners. Teaching online with the web, really not one of the big winners. Doesn't actually tip the needle into the negative territory. Like, if you do this, the odds are pretty good that you're actually going to negatively impact your students, but not by a lot, okay? Now, this is a book from 2008. Obviously, you can definitely nitpick methodology, and I certainly will nitpick methodology with the best of them. One of the things that I talk about when I teach about philosophy of technology is the details of the technology matter, right? Okay, so it's not terribly useful for me to have a number like, you know, the improvement index of this is 0.34 if you teach with technology, when I'm like, I can name 50 different technologies that you could potentially be teaching with, and I wouldn't consider them to all be the same, right? So why would we treat them analytically as if they were all the same? So yeah, there are issues that you could take with this, but by and large, if they're looking at large enough data sets, and some of these studies, when they start doing the meta-analyses, they're looking at tens of millions of students that were examined as parts of these analyses, okay? So we're starting to get some traction in terms of just sheer numbers, okay, of people that they've looked at. Well, problem-based learning, did that actually help? Okay, having a teacher with a master's degree versus just a bachelor's degree, did that help? You know, all that good stuff. So there's stuff that we're starting to look at, but one of the things that this particular set of research seems to indicate is that the picture of marrying technology and education is particularly not clear. Part of the reason for this is that we don't really have a lot of shared languages. Okay. One of the first things when I started looking at the Hattie book was, well, this is a lot of studies that are focused on K through 12. Okay. Kids in middle school don't learn the same way as my students do, so why should I trust, you know, a meta-analysis that includes this in the same pot? We should be careful about the language that we use, okay? Teaching, I'm going to loop back, teaching is a constructed activity, okay? Anybody want to raise the hand and identify my friend here? Be brave, come on. I know you know this, he was on my wall for so long. Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus wrote this lovely work on the education of children. Desiderius Erasmus, great member of the Renaissance in the European 16th century. What else is it important to know about Erasmus? Loved teaching, cared about it deeply. When Erasmus was talking about the work of a teacher, who was he talking about teaching? Who were the students for Erasmus? The rich. Specifically, the work on the education of children is addressed to the Duke of Cleves. Is this ringing any bells for any fans of Tudor history? Yeah, Anne of Cleves. The woman that Henry VIII married, wife number 4. The one who was so well connected that he couldn't just behead her, but he had to have her legally declared his sister, so as to escape the powerful Duke of Cleves, who would certainly descend upon England with all his forces. Yeah, that kind of rich and powerful, okay? So when Erasmus is talking about education, okay, if we think we can borrow his ideas and his structure and apply them wholesale, it's lovely. I mean, if I was going to be taught by anybody, I would love to be taught by this guy, okay? But it's not realistic, because when he says teacher, he doesn't mean teacher in the same way that we mean teacher. Okay, he's talking about a tutor, he's talking about teaching boys who are going to be wealthy and royalty, and it's not the same thing. Sadly, and I say this with all love, this is the guy. And you'll notice I put his name down there because there's not a prayer, and, well, I'm assuming, I may be making a rash assumption. Did anybody recognize this guy just without the name? Even with the name, it's hard. Thomas Cooper. He was an Englishman, good friend of Thomas Jefferson's. Many of you may remember that Thomas Jefferson was prominent for proposing the notion that we should have publicly funded education in the country. Because if we're going to have elected representation, it would help if the people who were doing the electing had some background knowledge before we turn them loose with the vote. So far, so good? So Thomas Cooper shows up and he writes a couple of things, okay, that I'm sure you've all been scanning this wonderful list of handouts that that I haven't been making very much use of as yet. I'm going to borrow. Thank you. The first duty of a republic is to provide for the instruction of its citizens, the next to exact the evidences of it. Okay? This is a lot closer to where we are at in terms of what the work of teaching is doing. Okay? I particularly love the next quote. Many therefore think that every man, however poor, should be required to pay a small sum for the education of his children, that he may feel that he has a right to have them educated, and take an interest in the management and the success of the school. They think, therefore, the state should furnish no more than a competent teacher. Cooper was really clear about this. He was this is actually in a work on economics. And he felt that if we provided free, excellent education, that would remove the stimulus for people to try to better themselves economically, because they couldn't buy better education for their children. I know, how warped is that, you know? But yes, so you should only get somebody who's okay, and you should only pay him a okay salary, you know, enough to keep the guy in their place. So, yeah, he actually wound up being the president of the University of South Carolina, and they named the library after him. Very strange man. I encourage you to look him up. He's got a life history that really should be a Hollywood movie at some point. I know, you wouldn't know it to look at him, you know? Okay. So this is where we get to the part of the actual construction, and I'm going to try to go through this very, very quickly. I know Priscilla knows this diagram. This is a Lancastrian classroom. This is where publicly funded education, my argument is, this is where publicly funded education comes from in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. Okay? We wanted to be able to publicly fund, well, actually, not all of us did. A lot of us didn't want to spend public money on education. There were lots of different arguments why we shouldn't do this. And I should also mention that we weren't necessarily the people who were supporting this were not necessarily promoting the education of women, although there were lots of girls in the schools. They weren't necessarily promoting the education of African Americans or Native Americans, but they also had schools under the Lancastrian system. What you're seeing here is rows of benches, and the dots are where each kid would sit. The manuals for the Lancastrian system specify a given number of inches of bench per child. These are the sand tables where the little kids would be sitting and scribbling their letters into sand. This was much cheaper than paper and pen. The whole thing, by the way, is designed for maximum cost efficiency. Okay? These are the reading drafts, so you don't have to buy textbooks. What you do is you print the books on very, very large pieces of paper. You hang them up at stations around the room, and then you troop the children like a little army from station to station to station, and the monitors, the other students, will basically lead them through the teaching. So far, so good? Take a guess, how many students in a Lancastrian classroom? 500 is pretty close. Joseph Lancaster used to run, when he was teaching, had classrooms of as many as 1,000. These would be kids from the ages of about 4 or 5 through to about 16. I have found examples in the United States with as many as 670. Okay, one teacher. Okay, this was the bargain. Okay, and it's interesting to look as they are trying to, because this was a big educational craze. You think iPads, you know, one-to-one laptop situation? Yeah, this was bigger, okay? They rapidly established over a 15-year period, almost my best guess, based on the fact that a lot of these schools didn't last very long, you know, they were supplanted by other schools. My best guess, my actual numbers are right now about 130 schools of this kind were established in the United States in a 15-year period. But given that a lot of them disappeared, we're probably looking at more in the order of 150 to 200. Okay, that is extremely rapid take-up for cities and for states that had no prior educational system in place. Okay, not a system. Individual venture schools, we had plenty. Okay, but a system where teachers had to be trained, because you couldn't take anybody and put them in a Lancastrian school. You had to have the knowledge, and that's a fun thing to look at. But it's interesting to watch because they had this crisis. They wanted to open a school. In fact, this happened right in New Brunswick. Okay? They had inherited money that had to be spent on the education of poor children. If you were going to educate the poor, this was the system that politically you had to employ. Okay? Just like you would be considered crazy if you set up a school and you didn't have any computers in the classroom today. If you were trying to set up that kind of a school back then and you weren't using the Lancastrians, people would think you were wasting the public money. Had to be Lancastrian. Took them almost 2 years to find a qualified teacher. Okay? And when they did find the qualified teacher was 16 years old, and up until the preceding month had been a student himself in New York Public School number 1. Okay? That's how desperate it was getting in terms of finding people to staff these specific kinds of classrooms, and how dependent they were on people who could demonstrate the technical qualifications for running the classroom. Remember, these people are described, the teachers are described as engineers. They are the operators of a system, of a tool that produces educated children. Okay? But here comes the question. No one had seen this kind of teacher before. And it was important, remember, that they think that the other teachers are drunks and bums, okay? It's important that they're not like the other teachers, okay? So what does the teacher actually do? Does the teacher sweep the floor in the classroom? Okay? Does the teacher go to the student's house when the student is absent? Okay? Does the teacher collect tuition money? Okay? All of these are examples of things that were discussed and argued, and they tried different things, and this is that period of interpretive flexibility that I'm talking about. There was a big conversation as to whether or not the teacher, whether it was preferable for the teacher to have some college education, or whether they should have academy training, or whether they didn't need any of that. And based on the fact that they were very happy to hire Shepard Johnson, who was 15 years old and just came from public school number 1, technical qualifications in this particular situation trumped academic components. So far, so good? Okay. Now, there is actually a really interesting dissertation that was written actually at Rutgers in the 1960s, which tries to demonstrate how this particular system got carried forward in secondary and higher education. I'm not going to go there. The main thing that I want to point out to you is that no one knew what the teachers looked like. It was important that they were not the same people. Okay? And there was a lot of discussion as to what components the teachers needed to possess in order to perform successfully given this new setup. Okay. All right. Oh, students in a, yeah. Don't they look like iPads? They really do. Okay. So if teaching is a constructed act, what do we think teaching is consistent of today? Okay. So can we take for, have I made a reasonable case that you can't just say teaching is teaching is teaching? Okay. We make up our minds what qualities we want in our teachers. Okay? And then we try to set up a system that will produce a sufficient quantity of these people so that we're able to staff and continue to run our educational institutions, because otherwise, well, the lights go out and the trains stop running and all kinds of bad stuff happens. That's good. Okay. This is one model. It's a model that I happen to really like and I find very useful, especially when I'm talking to other people about the work that I do. Okay? So this was proposed by 2 authors, Panya Mishra and Matt Kohler from the University of Michigan. This is from a 2006 article in Teachers College. By the way, the handout that you've got has got a little URL at the top of it. This has got all the formal citations and all the goodies. So if you want to go and take a look at some of this stuff in more detail, I strongly, especially in the case of this article, because it's a wonderful thing. So what they're suggesting is, and I'm going to go forward one slide. Back in the 1980s, some guy, education professor, had this revolution. I know this is like my God, if I had only been alive and old enough in the 1980s to write something like this down, I too could have tens of thousands of citations. But yes, basically what he said is this, that the work of teaching as it's currently conceptualized is that there is content knowledge and that there is pedagogical knowledge. And the way that we train teachers is we treat the content knowledge as if it is completely separate from the pedagogical knowledge. And this is a bad idea, and we should change it. They still haven't really changed it, but at least somebody in the 1980s was brave enough to say, this is a bad idea. You know, we should try to get people who are both knowledgeable and good at teaching. Okay. fast forward 20 years. And you can see where I'm going with this. So Mishra and Kohler basically said, okay, we're teaching more and more with new components. Okay. There is an argument that I think you can make about how different teaching actually is with technology as opposed to without technology, but leaving that aside for the moment, what they're basically suggesting is now we've got this third thing going on here, which is not only do you have to worry about pedagogical knowledge and content knowledge, but now you also have technological knowledge. And in the article, they go into a lot of detail talking about the different the Venn diagram, but it's this little triangle in the middle that I want to point to. The technological, pedagogical, content knowledge. Whew. God, that's hard to say. TPACK. Everyone calls it TPACK. Say it with me. TPACK. There you go. Okay, now, I think a few of you can see where I'm going with this. Okay, so we have this model. Mishra and Kohler are suggesting that the really effective implementations of educational technology and teaching are happening in the middle of that Venn diagram. They're happening with people who are knowledgeable about their content, who are knowledgeable about how to teach that content, and who also understand enough about the technology to be able to apply it in the specific situations where it is useful and say, no, wait a minute, that's a bad idea. I'm not going to do it in that situation. So far, so good? Mm-hmm. Okay. Structurally speaking, how do we produce those individuals at Rutgers? I told you I wasn't going to have any great answers for some of the questions today. What I want to do is suggest one of the things, how many of us work in pedagogical support of one flavor or another? I know quite a few. Okay. How many of us are strictly teaching? Okay, another handful. Everybody else just sort of here for the ride or the cookies or for other reasons? Okay, that's okay. One of the things that I find fascinating, one of the things that I have found fascinating in my 20 years at Rutgers is how effectively we sometimes wall off these various practices from each other. It is difficult to find positions at the university if you are doing IT and pedagogical support where you are encouraged to teach. Okay, it's always possible, okay, but it's not really written into part of what you're supposed to be doing. Now, those of us who actually do this work will tell you that we get a lot more authority and command a lot more respect from faculty if we're able to say, I tried this in my classroom and, or I know about this because I have graded like you have graded and it is tough to do, okay? But by and large, we do not select, train, and retain people based on those qualities. Okay, I am fairly certain, based on my 16 years of being hired and working as an instructor at Rutgers, okay, that we are also, while this is starting to change, by and large we are not hiring people, okay, to teach in the classroom based on these qualities, okay, which is not a bad thing. I mean, God knows, now that I'm getting to the end of my doctorate, I am really feeling that, my God, it is enough, you know. It's enough that I can talk to you. I mean, I can rattle off the enrollment and the pay rates of teachers in the 19th century, and I cram my brain with this stuff. I mean, you know, shouldn't that be enough? I mean, do I have to know about the Thingley? You know, do I have to know about all the YouTube resources? I mean, for God's sake, when is it enough? But, you know, so this is the thing. If it's important to cross-train, maybe we should do more to try to make those possibilities open, okay? Actively encourage them, okay? If it makes you a better pedagogical support person, yeah, you know, find a way, okay? If you're a faculty member, God help you, okay? You know, I'm going to say this, this is the 22-year-old version of me, okay, so bear with me. Would it kill you to learn a little HTML? No, the realist in me is like, no, that's not going to happen, okay? I think that we can move the needle on this particular issue, okay? But I think that it's important that we start to recognize that conceptually, we are dealing with a model that treats these three spheres as fairly separate from each other. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask you to dial back. I know that I'm just about at the end of my talk. Okay? I want you to dial back and I want you to think about those students. Remember how I said they were an important part of the context? They're going to have a lot of options, okay? Somebody is going to get this right, okay? Somebody is going to figure out a way to consistently set it up in such a way so that the people that are doing the work of the teaching are closer to the center of this Venn diagram, okay? We want them to be, we want to be the ones who got it right, okay? Because our students will have other options. They will have options that are more attractive economically. They will have options that are more attractive geographically. For God's sake, they offered 2 sections of my technological change in the world of work class this semester, one on campus, one online. I think you know how that enrollment pattern went. I know it's a better class in person. Online filled in less than a week. Okay? On campus never broke 8. Okay? So, they will have geographically more attractive options. And if we don't start to think about how to put together individuals who have either the access to the resources or the knowledge developed in themselves, they will have better educational options. Okay? So far, so good? How's that for a depressing note to end? Maybe we should eat some more sugar. But I think that trying to describe this is at least a step in the right direction. Okay? Now, Mishra and Kohler's model is not the only model. Okay? One of the models that's sort of a counterpart model is that these are actually very separate realms and that we should have individuals that are specialists in one or the other. I'm going to argue that in a research institution like Rutgers, this model is not particularly appropriate. We can see that, for example, at some of the for-profit universities, and I don't mean to demonize, okay? But at the for-profit universities, the faculty are by and large not responsible for setting up the curriculum. It's curriculum in a can. Somebody else has done that job, okay? If Rutgers is making the case that as a research institution, its research activities are informing and improving the teaching, I would argue that other models are not as attractive, should not be as useful for us in this situation. So far, so good? Okay. So, I think, yeah, I'm gonna wrap up with one more bit of history. And this is the last time I'm going to the 19th century well, for today. So I'm doing research, and one of my favorite things about doing the archival research is just the weird stuff that turns up. And this was one of the weird bits that turned up. Ran away, 1 cent reward, ran away from the subscriber on the 9th, a boy named Austin Camp, son of Ambrose Camp, an apprentice to the tailoring business, about 18 years of age, about 5 feet 5 inches high, had on, when he went away, a dark mixed cotton coat and a pair of light blue cassinet pantaloons. The said boy is inclined to be proud, lazy, hard to please, of vile disposition, ungovernable temper, and very much addicted to gambling and other evil practices, which are too indelicate to mention, and has already lived with 3 different masters. I hereby forewarn all persons from harboring the said boy under the penalty of the law. I will give the above reward. 1 penny. But no charges or thanks to any person who will apprehend and deliver the said boy to me on the 5th Cross Street. The reason why this caught my eye is the system that was getting replaced by public education was by and large the apprenticeship system, okay? And one of the ways that the apprenticeship system began to falter, okay, is because the social ties that made the apprentice treated as a member of the family by his master were starting to break down. Masters had started to board their apprentices out. Masters had started to pay other people to teach their apprentices as opposed to teaching them themselves. The role of apprentice and master was becoming more of a legal arrangement than an actual educational practice, okay? And it started to crumble and decay right around the time when public schools were becoming a more viable, a more general education that would be applicable in different economic circumstances under different technological conditions. I mean, if you apprenticed as a shoemaker and they came up with a nifty machine to make you were kind of out of luck, okay? One of the things that it makes me think about is that educational practices are not eternal. In universities, we have been around for a really long time, but I would argue that the university of the 11th century, just as I was talking about with Erasmus, is not the university of the 21st century, okay? So one of the things that it makes me think about is how do we stave this off, okay? And I would argue that one of the best ways that we can stave it off is by being as focused, as intentional, as purposeful, and as successful as we can figure out how to be with one of our important missions, which is the teaching and the preparation of our students for the rest of the life. And that's what I have to say about that. So I'm going to take any questions if anybody has any. I want to say thank you. It was so nice to talk to human beings with pulses and eyeballs, and so great. And if anybody would like any of the additional material, I can give you the whole 180 pages of the dissertation, but I wouldn't do that to you. I don't even think my mom's going to read it. I want to thank you and say if there are any questions, I'd love to stick around. Thank you.